During his 40 years in the Senate, Ted Stevens worked with 7 different presidents, some better than others. His first was President Richard Nixon. The list includes 5 Republican presidents and 2 Democrats. And during that same time period, Stevens also worked with 7 different Alaska governors. 4 of them Republicans, 3 Democrats. And one of those Democrats is Tony Knowles, who served 2 terms as governor of Alaska. And we want to thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts on former Senator Ted Stevens. Okay, so you're a Democrat. He was a Republican. And I know there are lots of labels that are attached by people to politicians. But when you really look at it, the 2 of you didn't differ on very much when it came to political philosophy, did you? I mean, we were pretty much cut from the same cloth in a lot of ways.
We had a great relationship. I knew as governor that anything that we needed in working with federal government, and you do it on so many fronts, that he was just one phone call away from working out an answer. And it wasn't a matter of Democrat or Republican. The only sieve that he put something through was, is it right for Alaska and is it right for America? And that's the only criteria that he had, and we sorely missed that.
Yeah. How about as far as the mayorship, too? You served 2 terms as mayor of Anchorage in the early 80s, and you worked with him there directly to get a lot of money for the city, I'm sure.
Well, we had a wonderful time again there, and he was an extraordinary public servant because it was not just the dedication to service, but the breadth of issues that he had to deal with. While he was chair of the Military Appropriations Committee, mayor from Anchorage, giving him a call, telling him about the problems we had locally. And if I can share one story with you, which to me says so much about Senator Stevens. Anchorage needed a new landfill. As you remember, we had a landfill out by Merrill Field, kind of right in the middle of town. It was all filled up, and the experts came to me and said, well, we're going to have to move it to Sand Lake gravel pits. And I said, that's the last place we're going to move it to. They've been yelling for 10 years about gravel trucks going one way, and if I send garbage trucks to fill them up, I'm out of here. So I said, we need to look and find somewhere else. And it seemed obvious that maybe Fort Richardson, which had so much land available, it would be a perfect place between the growing communities in Eagle River and Chugach and Anchorage, and would be a perfect place to put one. So I went to see the general out there, and he very briefly told me, Mr. Mayor, I'm an infantry officer, and we don't give up land, we take land. So the answer is not no, but it's never. Yeah. So that seemed pretty solid to me. So I got on the phone, called Senator Stevens, and here's a person who was the chair of the Military Appropriations Committee, and who was a great friend of the military, a strong supporter of the military. And when I explained the situation to him, he said, well, of course Anchorage should have that land. And I know that there's some available that won't interfere with training. So he called up the Secretary of the Army and said, I want your assistant over here today to talk to the mayor about land in Anchorage. And the assistant to the secretary came in, and Senator Stevens kind of locked his heels and said, now what's your story about this land? And this guy started to tell him why we couldn't have it. And he interrupted him and said, excuse me, Assistant Secretary, we're going to get that land for Anchorage, and if you don't want to give it to him, you're going to come to that city and explain to the people of Alaska and the people of Anchorage as to why you can't be able to do it. And within about 3 weeks, we not only had a new general in Alaska, but we had the Eklutna landfill, which was a blessing for this city. So we decided, how can we honor him for that? And he was coming back for Christmas, and I said, I had a great idea. I said, we'll get a bunch of garbage trucks, and we'll have a kind of parade of garbage trucks to meeting at the airport. And one of my staff said, Mr. Mayor, you know, he's a United States Senator. I don't know if he'd like to see a parade of garbage trucks to meet him. But we said, no, I think he would understand. So we went out there. We had an orange jumpsuit with Senator Ted Stevens on it, the sanitation department on the other side. We had the garbage trucks, and he loved it.
I bet. He
loved it. And he wore that, apparently, to all the parties during Christmas. He wore that orange jumpsuit. What a great servant he was to the people of Alaska and to America.
Great. Tony Knowles, thanks so much for stopping by and sharing the story.
Great.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again. Thank you. Well, Ted Stevens was a man of many traditions. One was to celebrate the day he was chosen to replace the late Bob Bartlett in the Senate. Each year on December 24th, he and his family would pay a visit to the Walter Hickel family. Friends were also on hand to mark the anniversary. There was some champagne toasts and a lot of reminiscing about a decision that surprised even Stevens.
I knew that he had made a commitment to Carl, and also knew that I'd lost the primary that year to Elmer Rasmussen, and that he was entitled to be considered. And I was very surprised when the final decision was made.
Another annual event was always was a big hit, was the Kenai River Classic. Stevens started the Classic 18 years ago as a way to raise money for habitat restoration along the Kenai. At times in those boats, it was a who's who of politics. About 250 people took part in the Classic each year. According to organizers, it has raised about $12 million for the river since the event began. There are many different things that people will remember about Ted Stevens: his passion, his dedication, his temper. He used all three of those character traits to push for the things that he felt Alaska needed. Channel 2's Todd Walker has that story.
I think they're trying to bridge this gap that exists in the Senate.
During his 4 decades as United States Senator, Ted Stevens became known nationwide for the billions of dollars he brought back to the last frontier every year, and for that famous temper.
It is not wilderness. Anyone who comes to this floor and says this is drilling wilderness is a liar. A liar.
It wasn't just to blow off steam.
I have a trial lawyer's temper. I lose it, and I know where to find it.
Senator Stevens always maintained it was for the good of his beloved Alaska.
We've asked to be treated the same as people who live in any other state. The programs that are available in Ohio ought to be available in Holikachuk and Shizmaref.
From the very beginning of his career,
unless we bring in Alaska development, we may be too dependent upon Arab oil before the end of this decade.
Senator Stevens fought for the development of Alaska's natural resources, and his sights were ultimately set on getting the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge open to drilling.
I'm just doing my utmost to do my job, which is to try and get ANWR approved.
And Senator Stevens never gives up. He's been working on ANWR for 25 years because he believes that that's the right thing for the people of the state of Alaska.
And though his time in the Senate ran out before he could get ANWR passed, Senator Stevens not getting what he wanted was a rare occurrence.
$200,000 for the city of North Pole, Alaska for recreation improvements.
For years, Senator Stevens was known in Washington as the king of pork.
You have no reason to suspect that Senator Stevens won't be #1 again when it comes to per capita pork barrel spending.
In Alaska, he was known for the same reasons, simply as Uncle Ted.
Whether you know it or not, I'm responsible for almost $3 billion a year that goes into the Alaska economy.
In his final years as senator, those earmarks worth millions of dollars he had become so famous for came under attack.
It's on Jay Leno, David Letterman, it's on sitcoms, it's everywhere.
In the form of a couple bridges.
Everybody knows what the bridge to nowhere is.
In 2005, Senator Stevens included $250 million in a federal road bill for the construction of 2 bridges, one across the Knik Arm, the other connecting Ketchikan to its airport, or as it became known around the world, nowhere.
They selected a target, and the target was the bridges, and they were going to make it the biggest piece of pork in the world.
Following Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Congress was reallocating money to rebuild Louisiana's infrastructure, and Senator Stevens said they were unfairly targeting the earmark for Alaska's bridges and not taking money from anywhere else.
But I will put the Senate on notice, and I don't kid people. If the Senate decides to discriminate against our state and take money only from our state, I'll resign from this body. This is not the Senate I came to. This is not the Senate I've devoted 37 years to.
And once again, when a behind-closed-doors deal was reached, Senator Stevens came out victorious. The money would stay. And that's the way it was for Alaska's longtime senator. When Congress tried to cut funding for his projects, he would find a way to get it back, much to the chagrin of Beltway insiders.
Alaska has a very powerful appropriator, and it's all but certain that this money will be restored.
It's money that didn't come without a fight, and it was during those fights that Senator Stevens' alter ego came out.
I got to wearing it, and one day I wore it and we had a terrible battle on the floor, and we won.
A superhero tie that was a gift from his daughter that later became a symbol of the senator's power.
We were hoping that you could. Now we're
start talking.
And a point of pride for Alaskans that kept electing Uncle Ted for his Hulk-like abilities.
Oh, deep down inside, I'm a real SOB, as you know.
Even after he left the Senate floor for the final time, Senator Stevens was still fighting for Alaska. During one of his final public appearances, he was still advocating for the development of Alaska's natural resources, this time urging lawmakers to support an all-Alaska gas line.
Let's move ahead. We don't need any more open seasons. We don't need any more periods for analysis. We need an emphasis on getting the job done.
And it was his passion for getting the job done that kept Uncle Ted going for more than 40 years.
The people of Alaska and this nation are better for having Ted Stevens around.
They'll tell me someday I'll have to come home, but they'll have to tell me.
With us now is an old friend of Ted Stevens, more importantly, an old fishing buddy, Bob Penny. Thanks so much for coming in. We saw some examples of that famous Stevens temper from the floor of the Senate. How much of that was real, and how much was that? How much of it was for effect?
Let me tell you, Steve, most of it is for effect. He's trying to accomplish something. He's trying to get a goal. He's got to be tough and 7 foot tall, and he's not. And he's trying to get his point across. So a lot of it. He had a very sharp temper, but most of that was effect, and it was very effective.
Very effective indeed, yeah. What should we know about him that you knew about, but we maybe didn't pick up on, or we just didn't know about through the news conferences, the news stories, the press releases, things like that? What could you tell us about him? What should we know?
I'd say the thing that's dearest to me is his sense of humor. People, unless you're with him and you're a friend and he's relaxed, like we'd go in fishing, he's had the funniest and best sense of humor I've ever seen anybody. Subtle, dry. I take Band-Aids with me because he's always digging me or getting me, so we're digging him back. That the thing people didn't see about Ted is his sense of humor, his compassion, and how he really felt about things. Somebody was sick that was his friend in hospital. He'd make a special trip to Anchorage to just go see him. So he was a very, very wonderful man, and the most enduring thing to me was his way he'd laugh.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed, we were going through dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of pictures of him in video for this program, and one of the things that struck me is he seemed to have a real connection to kids. He liked kids, didn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, you could take him someplace and have 5 or 6 kids come by. He'll stop what he's doing to go over and talk to the kids and get down and talk to them and really encourage them. But he's a very much a person that reached out to other people, but if it was the kids, hey, that's who he's going to go talk to.
Yeah. He's a pretty humble guy and didn't like to toot his own horn. I understand that you tried to honor him a while ago, and it didn't go so well. Tell us about that story.
Oh, about 4 years ago, I think it was, I went to him and I said, hey, Ted, you know, we're putting together a committee and we're going to make a bronze statue of you. I said, we were going to make it life-size, but we thought about it and it wouldn't be very impressive, so we're going to make it taller than life-size, so it'd be more impressive. And I said, we've already talked to some people and we think we can put it on a Lusac Library lawn right next to Ann Stevens' room. And he says, no, you won't. I said, well, why? He says, you don't do that until I'm gone. And I said, well, you really mean that? And he says, yeah. I said, okay, I won't. And you know what he said? You better be ready for a long wait. So we are doing again. Carl Brady has agreed to co-chair with me, and we're going to raise $250,000 to $500,000 or whatever it takes to put a statue in place to really honor Ted for all Alaskans. He has that coming to him.
Okay. What are you going to remember most about him?
All the times, good times had together, all the fishing, laughing, and having a good friend, my best friend.
All right. Well, we thank you very much for coming on and telling some stories and remembering Ted Stevens. We really appreciate it.
Here's to Ted.
All right.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Good friend of Ted Stevens. We're remembering Ted Stevens right after this. Stay with us. terms as governor of Alaska, and we want to thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts on former Senator Ted Stevens. Okay, so you're a Democrat, he was a Republican, and I know there are lots of labels that are attached by people to politicians, but when you really look at it, the two of you didn't differ on very much when it came to political philosophy, did you? I mean, we were pretty much cut from the same cloth in a lot of ways.
We had a great relationship. I knew as governor that chair of the Military Appropriations Committee, mayor from Anchorage, giving him a call, telling him about the problems we had locally. And if I can share one story with you, which to me says so much about Senator Stevens. Anchorage needed a new landfill. As you remember, we had a landfill out by Merrill Field, kind of right in the middle of town. It was all filled up, and the experts came to me and said, well, we're going to have to move it to Sand Lake gravel pits. And I said, we sorely missed that.
Yeah. How about as far as the mayorship, too? You served two terms as mayor of Anchorage in the early 80s, and you worked with him there directly to get a lot of money for the city, I'm sure.
Well, we had a wonderful time again there, and he was an extraordinary public servant, because it was not just the dedication to service, but the breadth of issues that he had to deal with while he was.
During his 40 years in the Senate, Ted Stevens worked with 7 different presidents, some better than others. His first was President Richard Nixon. The list includes 5 Republican presidents and 2 Democrats. And during that same time period, Stevens also worked with 7 different Alaska governors. 4 of them Republicans, 3 Democrats. And one of those Democrats is Tony Knowles, who sued
anything that we needed in working with federal government, and you do it on so many fronts, that he was just one phone call away from working out an answer. And it wasn't a matter of Democrat or Republican. The only sieve that he put something through was, is it right for Alaska, and is it right for America? And that's the only criteria that he had. And